What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day instead of putting it in a bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up the slack. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go screw themselves. Thus began the garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back into the dude's backyard. He would collect it, then dump it back on their lawns or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The street started to look like a slum. Police were called, health inspectors, city by law enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in crap. The dude and his family, amazingly his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. Apartment building. The upstairs neighbor's dog peed on their patio, and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading. I yelled and ran to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in future they said it wasn't their dog, and it must have blown over from somewhere else. What? Wow. That is next level. It is definitely a floor up. Had one that would basically steal our mail and other stuff from our porch and yard. Caught her once to confront her, and she started yelling at me to stop attacking her, and tried to say I was stealing her stuff. Ended up with the police getting called and us filing a restraining order against her. As a postal employee, you should have called the USPS. They don't frick around. USPS is one of those agencies where they are more scary than the FBI to me when they come knocking. Just straight up rednecks who wanted the full neighbor experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune where you could just demand things of your neighbors. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours but shared, because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumber yard / playground, where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No bullcrap, they're mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old account air handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often and at some pretty irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they moved away / got kicked out / went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said immortal death in a black gradient. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night, all cut up. Who knows if that's true, but if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities, because this comment is getting some attention. Lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe on their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights they used to put these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck, felt more like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mom watched him do it, and I specifically remember her saying he's gotta learn somehow after he fell. About a decade ago I moved into this small farming community with my husband. I opened the window and there was a naked child in the tree in my backyard. Show as about 6, 8ish, and should not have been running around outside naked, let alone being naked in a tree. Same situation there though, always showing up asking for snacks. She came to my house with her sister, wearing no shoes in the middle of winter, begging for something to eat, because her daddy was passed out wasted, and they didn't have any food in the house. I gave her some food, and sent her on her way. I called CPS, and was later told that her mother was friends with the advocate dude who came out. They went to school together. She assured him that the little girls were only lying to me. They showed up several times asking for food and water, then telling me stories about not having sewage hookup, just letting it run under the house. They told me the power was shut off, so they had a generator. No running water at one point, so their dad was going to drill a well. Never knew what to believe. Multiple calls to CPS didn't resolve anything. Either neglected or very clever and manipulative. Probably a bit of both. Our neighbors were in like the heart of suburban northwest Houston. They did not fit in at all. Our cul-de-sac referred to them as the Bodines. A bunch of things with my ding dong neighbor. She had a large dog that hated my older, smaller dog. One day her dog ran into my yard and bit my dog. She did apologize for this one. Did not happen again. Neighbor dumped her lawn clippings into my backyard. Had to ask her to stop and clean up her mess. She decided to build a fence. No survey. So I paid for a survey of my property. She started building her fence 3 feet over on my property. I had her stop and remove the fence. She was angry and never rebuilt it. I painted my house. She painted her house. Same color. I bought a new car. She bought a new car, same color, same configuration. There's other minor stuff, but that's enough. Odd person. Very odd. You get a window made of glass. She gets a window made of glass. You get clock radio. She cannot afford clock radio. Great success. My neighbor once shot both my dogs and his goat and made me bury both. One dog survived, thankfully. He then tried to make us pay for a new goat, claiming that our dogs attacked it. The goat had bullet wounds and no bite marks. The dude's a psychopath. New series on Discovery. I lived next door to a serial killer. He lived in the apartment right below my husband and I. It went from constant complaints to him calling the cops on us multiple times to him leaving a threatening message on our car and front door. When we first moved in, he was upset with the landlord for renting above him, left plenty of unpleasant notes, and interrupted quite a few times when we were talking to the landlord. When we moved in, we only had a mattress and no other furniture, but he kept calling the landlord saying that we were moving furniture around at 2 AM and had our TV at full blast. After the 8th complaint and 2 months of us still moving around furniture and TV being too loud, we finally showed our apartment to the landlord. We literally didn't have a TV and still only had out mattress. Then the neighbor started leaving notes on our car telling us to keep it down, and he even put in writing there needs to be no noise after 10 PM or else I'll call the cops. We usually didn't even get home until after 11 PM, and we were respectful to make sure we kept things down because we knew that not everyone had our work schedule. So we tried keeping it down even more, and there were so many instances when we'd be eating dinner or cuddling quietly or even sleeping and he'd be banging on his ceiling / our floor. After a few months he started calling the cops, and it got to the point where even the cops told him to stop calling about a noise complaint because it's a landlord issue, and every time they came they never heard anything. The last time they showed up I was asleep and my husband ended up talking to them and explaining everything. They suggested that we file a harassment complaint. Then the cops showed up at the coffee shop I worked at the time and explained that they were getting almost nightly calls, and they suggested to me too that we should file a harassment complaint against the neighbor. Then he started leaving threatening notes on our car and front door, and we kept hearing our doorknob jiggle. He claimed that he and a friend had sat outside our apartment for 2 hours and listened to all the noise we were making. He's a retired cop and will call in a few favors if we continue making noise. He knows where we park our car, so we better start parking it somewhere else if we didn't want it to get damaged, etc. We kept the notes and made copies for the landlord and let him know that this was what we were dealing with, so we are just keeping him in the loop before crap started getting real. We're tired of this, and if an old guy gets his crap rocked, then just know that it's been a long time coming. The last complaint was when he ran outside to the landlord screaming that something needed to be done about us because he heard our bed squeak the night before, and how dare he rent to some crazy college kids who are partying and having sex all night. The landlord finally told him to stop being a bitter old man. Then the neighbor took a total 180, and we found out that he had decided to sue the landlord and was moving. Suddenly the neighbor kept offering us rides when one of us were walking. He stopped complaining and leaving notes, but our doorknob kept jiggling and turning at around midnight, and whenever we would check on our door we'd hear someone running down the hall as we'd approach our door. He eventually moved away, and shockingly we haven't gotten a complaint from any other neighbor in the last 3 years we've lived here. The first apartment I lived in, I had a neighbor that would try opening the door. Didn't hear it myself because I worked nights, but I came home early one night around 2 AM and he was trying to had a huge argument with him, and he stopped doing it after that. I'm guessing he thought it was just my 2 female roommates living there because he never tried anything after he knew I was there as well. Kinda opened my eyes at the time to the sort of crap women have to deal with. I was on autopilot at one point and didn't notice I'd hit the lift button below my floor. I realized after trying the keycode a few times and looked at the number plate. I announced to literally no one, "This is not my door." Still felt bad though. We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage, and she asked if she could put small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely didn't unplug it, and our landlord agreed. But she was mad. She had a son in college who came home for the summer. During that summer he found a cat and brought it home. His mom said no cats inside, so he would feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall, and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in her usual spot. Around Christmas we bought a bag of cat food, and I made a plate of cookies and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day they were both back on our porch. Rude. Whatever. We continued to feed the cat because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild and we had never let her inside before. I let her in and noticed she was pregnant and for sure about to have babies. I made her a little corner and she had babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us, but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to our neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat we had obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens, because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mom. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. It was the stupidest, most frustrating thing that had ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. Lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11. Like loud. And until something like 7 AM. Maybe later, but that's when I would leave for work. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door, but they would never open the door. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point I found out they often left for a bar across the street, but would just leave the music on, so I would pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 AM and turn it back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done, so at some point I would jam their lock when they went out, so their keys wouldn't work anymore, and they had to get the property manager in while the music was blasting inside. After a couple of times of that happening they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. Our current neighbors have 2 dogs they let out into their tiny backyard that borders our driveway. They never ever pick up the dog poop and it smells like crap. Also, one of the dogs freaks out when she sees us. They mow their lawn maybe 4 times a year. The grass gets so tall, it's taller than the smaller dog. We are putting up a privacy fence next week. I cannot wait. Had a share balcony with a cokehead. She would let her garbage bin with the bag open out on that balcony instead of in her damn kitchen all summer long. For a reason I'm not sure I understand, this caused my landlord and I to have dozens of flies in our home. Also the never-ending parties with loud music, door slamming, generally inconsiderate asshole. When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently they had been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours, and so overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one morning, technically, at about 3 AM we wake up to ring notifications from our phones showing video from our front doorbell. There's a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch pounding on our front door. We give it 2-3 minutes just watching him on the app thinking, maybe he's wasted and has the wrong house, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out you freaking pussy, I'm gonna frick you up etc." And he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the police as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look/listen for any attempt of home invasion. At this point our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from this. We are thinking, okay cool, they know something is up and they are trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and knock. We explain the situation and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior, I had let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, that I was trying to expose myself to his family because they could look down on our entire yard from where this sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and I inside of our own home doing totally normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous, not that it would have mattered anyway, we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the angle, so they had been filming us for no reason at all, and expected the police to see this as reasonable. The cops came back in, and my wife was devastated. A huge breach of our privacy of course, and totally unfounded accusations as we had never done anything to anger these people. We hadn't even met them. The police told us just don't worry about it. If he tries something again just give us a call, which wasn't the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in their driveway. When I started my first job post-college, I was thrilled to live by myself for the first time in my life. I had this beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a solid part of town. Everything was great until 6 months later, when new tenants moved in next to my unit. I had a package go missing, a phone case. Amazon had posted a photo of it at my door, so I thought that it was just a fluke. Then it happened again, and again, and again. The office wouldn't accept packages, so I had to get my items delivered to friends' places instead. Overall wildly inconvenient, and the police didn't care in the slightest when I reported it, so I just figured I'd deal with it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I come home, after being gone for less than an hour, to see that my door knob and front door were scrapped up and the knob was barely hanging on. Long story short, I had been parking in plain view of this guy's window, so he was able to tell when I was home. I'm 100% convinced he tried to break into my place, and that me coming home early interrupted him. I googled his name after I moved. I got it off a package at his door, and found that he was a convicted felon with charges that include grand theft auto, domestic assault, drug dealing, and an attempted break-in. I've been getting my packages shipped to my work recently, but my latest plan for our building package thief was this: order something from Amazon, carefully open the box on the bottom side so the main tape stays intact, fill the box with glitter, and poke some small holes in it. When the thief carries the package to their apartment, it will leave a trail of glitter on the carpet that will lead to their apartment. Call Mark Rober and ask for his Glitterbomb mail machine. Excellent stuff. Guy owned 6 cars and kept them all parked on the street in a very congested block of apartments. spent hours tending to them, and they somehow always looked rustier when he was done. If a leaf landed on one of his cars, he would accuse the neighborhood of intentionally placing leaves on his car to annoy him. On our street there really is only parking on one side of the street. The garages and driveways for most of the houses weren't meant for cars, but this is another rant. The parking is on our side and the people across the street from us at one point had a car for each member of the household, and the daughter was a crappy driver, so she needed at least 2 parking spaces, so they needed 7 parking spaces. So one household was taking a third of the parking. The best space to park is in front of my parents, especially in winter, as my parents would shovel it all out for easy access. This family never helped to shovel, even though they would complain if we didn't shovel out enough. So if my parents were out, they would fight to claim my parents' place. They call us the evil neighbors now, because one day, when my parents were away, the daughter and so were visiting in their brand new SUV, and of course parked in my parents' spot. Cue freak windstorm which destroyed their car, and the mums apparently it was my parents' fault as we had obviously cursed them. Does my former upstairs landlord count? He was a 19-year-old Chinese guy whose father had bought him the $5 million house we were already living in the basement suite of when it was sold up front. Dude started periodically complaining that I wouldn't stop cooking spicy food or curry, despite the fact that I'm a white person who is a huge wimp with chilies. The most I had used at any point when he complained was a black bean soup large enough to feed an army with 3 dried chipotles tossed in. I caved and switched to making only white people food for a few weeks to make him shut up. He still complained about spicy food when I was, among other things, frying onions in butter to make scrambled eggs and cooking potato soup. I came to the conclusion that he was so rich and clueless he'd probably never lived within 100 feet of a kitchen in his life. Finally, having established that his definition of spicy food was literally any and all human food, he quote unquote told me that I should be eating my spicy food in restaurants instead of cooking it. He then illegally evicted me with 2 weeks notice on the grounds that I wouldn't stop making curry. We literally spoke to a lawyer who told us we could fight it, but he genuinely had no idea what would possibly freaking happen in court, because at no point in human history has a Chinese person evicted a white person for frying onions, because they're that racist against Indian people and also have never lived within 200 feet of a kitchen. And there's me actually making curry, also white person, but grew up in the UK, which has a lot of Indian cuisine, without so much as a peep from my long suffering neighbors. This was almost 10 years ago when my husband and I were still dating, and we moved into our first apartment together. There were 4 buildings of apartments within walking distance of each other, and my run-in was with someone in a neighboring building. We had a dog and my husband worked all different shifts, while I didn't, so I was the regular dog walker. I was coming back from a walk with her when this guy comes out of one of the other buildings. He starts walking towards me, pitching a fit about the fact that I'm walking my dog. He says he's seen me just leave her crap on the grass and just walk away. A lie, 100%. He says he sees her squat all the time and I just keep walking. I was dumbfounded. I said, my dog is a female, that's how she pees. He then just continues going on and on and on, and at one point says, I've been watching you. And again, I'm dumbfounded. And I just go, you've been watching me? I remember going back to my apartment and calling my husband at work and just crying because I felt so scared and alone. We had been at that new place for only 1 month, so we had 11 more to go. We talked to the manager or managers and they were absolutely no help. They said yeah, they knew who we were talking about. He's had multiple complaints against him and they think he sells drugs. Oh, and if he does that again, call the cops.